There you
There we
go.
go. We're live now. All right. Julián Castro, thanks for joining us here at Progress, Texas, to talk a little bit about things that have been going on in the world, things that have been going on in your world. It seems like things may have been a little bit different in the last few months for you. And I want to start by saying your hair looks amazing. I have COVID hair and you have perfectly combed hair. How is that possible? How do you have such good hair right now?
Well, thank you so much for the compliment, Ed. No, my hair is longer than it usually is, but I was very lucky. I happened to get a haircut, like just basically a couple of days before everything hit, and people were no longer able to get a haircut. So it's had to last me longer than usual, but I still have, a haircut that's more recent than a lot of people's. My brother, on the other hand, Joaquin, who was supposed to be here today and wanted to apologize that he's not. He's doing his work as a congressman. He's got like Wolfman hair.
How dare he? How dare he miss our video to do his job in Congress? But we're glad he's doing it either way. All right, so I want to start off with some lighthearted questions here. I got a couple of things to ask you. First of all, I'm not a huge TikTok guy, but I watched the TikTok of you and your brother probably 10 times in a row. How did that come about? Whose idea was it? It had to be in the middle of your presidential campaign, right?
That's right. Yeah, I mean, probably a lot of folks have seen it. It was a neat little TikTok they put together. I can't take any credit for it. It was the folks at the Washington Post and the people in our campaign. I think our campaign had reached out to them because there had been a couple of other good candidate TikToks. And so, the idea was a really neat one to go at the media because they always confuse Joaquin and me. Like there'll be a picture of him and an article about me, or, a caption with my name when it's him that the story is about. And so it was about being able to tell the difference. And the guy that does it, I think Dave Jorgensen, he's got a great Twitter account also for those of y'all that follow him on Twitter. We set it up with a crew, and Joaquin and I happened to both be at DCA, at National Airport, at the same time one day that we were overlapping for like an hour and a half, and we were able to film that there. We filmed it at the airport, basically.
Yeah, that's great. Well, it was good. Like I said, I'm not a big TikTok guy, but I definitely put it on repeat. I thought it was great. Speaking of what's been going on since then, and speaking of your brother, one of the things that Joaquin put out recently, I got to ask you this. I hope not to embarrass you too much, but he put out a picture that showed a pretty impressive set of six-pack abs going on. Was that Photoshop? Was that real? Was that a coronavirus project?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, there you go. What are brothers for except to embarrass you? And I originally started near the beginning of this quarantine with this challenge to get like six-pack abs, and then the other guy that was going to be involved in it like dropped out and didn't do it. So it became a challenge with my brother. I did it, and that's that. I spared Joaquin going back at him on Twitter and making fun of him for not having that. So
well, we've got six packs around here, but they're the kind that don't give you six-pack abs. It's about as close as we get. Yeah. Is there anything that you're doing these days to kind of lighten the mood a little bit with coronavirus and like with the situation that we're in the quarantine? Yeah. Things are kind of helping you get through the day?
Well, for me, the silver lining in all of this has been that I was traveling a lot for the last 14 months. I mean, campaigning. Right. And then after I withdrew from the presidential race in January, of course, I supported Senator Warren for another 2 months until right after Super Tuesday when she withdrew from the race. So I've been at it, probably gone 70% of the time over the last 14 months. It has been a blessing, really, to get to spend time with my family, with my kids, Karina and Christian, especially because they're always, hopping around and, of course, at school. And I was on the road. And so that part has been good. And during the day, sometimes we'll go walk at one of the parks around here where we live in San Antonio, or we'll just go into the backyard and kick the soccer ball. we've been just finding little ways within these restrictions that all of us want to abide by and should
Yeah.
abide by for the public health, but our ways of kind of letting off the stress and getting out of the house so that they don't go stir crazy, but still having fun.
Well, your presidential campaign, of course, is here in Texas. We were all very proud of your run, and you left way too soon for our liking, but you lasted a whole lot longer than a lot of other people.
Sure.
And I know that it won't be the last we see of you. But during that campaign, and as well as your tenure as mayor and your tenure as U.S. Housing Secretary, you have demonstrated a lot of leadership, not only in the political space, but in the social space, talking about issues that transcend politics. And I think that what we're dealing with right now is really just this unique point in time where we're dealing with public health, we're dealing with society, and we're dealing with politics. So many things happening right now. What are you seeing the greatest need in Texas communities right now? And how are you able to connect people with resources?
Yeah, so it's fair to say that for the last 40 years, generally in this country, the narrative of smaller, weaker government is better government. This Reagan idea that you need to have small, weak government, that has carried the day in so many ways, and there's no better example of that than in Texas. As you know, we're a state that has one of the highest rates of lack of insurance for folks. We have a weak social safety net in Texas compared to a lot of other states. Our education system has not been invested in, and so that impacts things that are relevant right now, like the fact that a lot of kids out there don't have internet access at home that should have it. So what I see are, and so many people have said this, but I think it's even more true in Texas, that this has laid bare those inequalities and inequities that already existed in our state and our country, and has just exacerbated them. A good representation of that actually came out of here in San Antonio. Folks may remember that about a month ago now, there was a photo that went viral from the San Antonio Express News, and it was taken from overhead, a drone shot looking down on a sea of cars that looked like you were watching a mall parking lot during the holidays, or the biggest traffic jam on an 8-lane freeway in Los Angeles. And it was a picture of thousands of cars at a flea market where the San Antonio Food Bank was distributing food that day. 10,000 families got food that day from the food bank. It's just an example of the fact that so many people are either living in poverty, or they find themselves one missed paycheck away from not being able to pay the rent, away from being impoverished, from having to turn to a food bank. Those are the kinds of things that we see going on in San Antonio and in Texas, and that is directly related to choices that the governing majority has made over the last few decades.
And you make a really good point, about the Reagan era of small government is better and that we don't need government, when in fact, we are government. We rely on things like our military is government, public schools, public universities are extensions of government, that there are good things that come from our collective efforts. And when we look at some things some things privatized are fine, but obviously healthcare privatization has its problems, and there needs to be another alternative to that. And I think that communities can come together. The food banks are a really good show of that. One of the things I want to ask you is, thinking of limited government that you've touched upon, you have the other end of that, which is that someone like Governor Abbott has taken a limited government approach to the coronavirus response. And I think that we're starting to see the price we're paying for that, because the numbers are going up. With looking at his leadership, how would you, what are your comments on his leadership, and how do you think that it can be done differently?
He's been lackluster. He has missed an opportunity to save many more lives in the state of Texas by reopening the state early, when we ranked 48th per capita in the number of tests that were being conducted in Texas. Some of his own experts set the number of tests that we needed to do at least 40,000. And at the time, the most that we had done was 20,000. Even now, we have not done 40,000 in a single day. It was 40,000 per day. Same thing with contact tracing. The state failed to put in place a robust system of contact tracing. And because of that, what we've seen over the last few days is the longest string of days where we've had more than 1,000 new cases of the coronavirus. And maybe even more to the point, we had 58 deaths. I think yesterday that was reported. That was the highest number of deaths that we've had so far. So, you know, in many ways, this is going in the wrong direction because the governor made a bad decision. Part of that bad decision was not listening to local communities.
Yeah.
Communities like Houston and Harris County, San Antonio and Bexar County, Dallas and Dallas County that had measures in place that more closely aligned with what medical experts recommend. And the governor came out and said, no, my order is going to supersede all of those. That was a bad decision, and people are paying for that.
Yeah. So are there, looking at how Texas has responded to it, are there other states that you can point to that have led the way in a successful response? I saw the governor of New Mexico has been applauded for her response to this. Are there other examples or things that you think are examples that Texas could follow in this situation?
Yeah, I mean, the governor of New Mexico is a good example. Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, she had been the public health officer for the state at one time, and so she understood the need to act early. I think Governor Inslee out in Washington has been praised as well because they acted fairly quickly, early. You remember that in February there was that outbreak in Seattle. They responded to that robustly. Governor Newsom in California is another good example of that. And Governor Cuomo has also received a lot of praise for how involved he has been as a governor and how much they've relied on the science. And they have flattened the curve. And as he said, they're on the other side of the mountain now.
Yeah. Well, you touched on public health there. You know, public health obviously is a big issue in this crisis, but even beyond this crisis, access to affordable health care has been a really big issue in Texas. And we still have the highest number of people who are uninsured and the highest percentage who are uninsured. What could we do to get more access to affordable care for people in this state right away?
I mean, the thing that we could do right away, we should have done a long time ago, is expand Medicaid. A number of states, even Republican-controlled states, have forged their own, deal with the federal government so that they could move forward and expand Medicaid. Here in Texas, that would mean for hundreds of thousands of people, at least, if not more than that, that they would have access to good health care that they don't have today. And so, and not only that, fiscally, it makes sense because the federal government would pick up the lion's share of the tab. It would pick up all of the tab right away. And then I think after 3 years, the deal was that it would pick up 90% of the tab and the state would contribute 10%. We could expand Medicaid right away. We also, if you're talking about things that we can do immediately, we need to see more investment in community health clinics who often serve the most indigent. We need to see more investment in our public hospitals that play an important role in serving people who don't have other access to health care and giving them good health care. We can also invest in our universities that include hospital systems or a hospital. In Texas, we're falling behind in investing in patient care and in research when it comes to those universities. Those are things that we could do right away, either now or in the next legislative session.
Yeah. And I don't know if you saw this, but well-known Affordable Care Act supporter John Cornyn tweeted out yesterday that people who don't have health care should go onto the Obamacare exchanges and apply. Of course, he's not a supporter of the ACA, but it's funny how things change when the rubber hits the road, isn't it?
Oh, it absolutely is. I mean, he's finally he has finally found his way, I guess.
All it took was a pandemic.
Yeah.
What do you know? I want to shift gears here for a second and talk about another important issue that we've faced recently, and one that not only is important, but one that I think you know quite a bit about, and that's housing. Yesterday, the state Supreme Court said that evictions can continue. Now, that's going to take some time in some cities because the courts aren't opened yet, but the thinking behind this just seems so disconnected from what's happening around us. I'm sure that you have thoughts on this and other ways that we can navigate this. And I know that I and the rest of the viewers would love to hear what you think about that.
We had a housing affordability crisis before this pandemic.
Right.
And this pandemic, as you know, and the rents rising in so many places, so many individuals and families paying 50, 60, 70% of their income in rent.
Mm-hmm.
We had growing number of homeless people in our country for the last 2 years. I'm proud that during the Obama administration, those numbers went down by about 11% over the Obama administration, and veteran homelessness had gone down by 47% between 2010 and 2016. Those things were going up already, and now, up much faster. So we need a couple of things. First of all, renters need the protection of not facing eviction. It makes no sense in the middle of this pandemic when over the last 8 weeks, 36 million people have filed for unemployment.
Right.
They don't have, many of them still are not getting their unemployment benefits, right? On top of that, because Texas is a good example of this, the system is not designed to serve people very well. It takes longer than it should. It's not very responsive. On top of that, $1,200 is not enough to cut it for most people.
It's nothing.
So if you allow landlords to be able to evict people, they're going to start that eviction process immediately. And, I applaud local communities that have set up these rental assistance funds. San Antonio set aside $25 million. I think Dallas set aside $15 or $20 million at a fund as well. But we need significant investment from the federal and state governments for direct rental assistance to keep people in their homes, in their apartments, and also an eviction moratorium. Some people point out, and I agree with folks, look, most landlords are not this big corporate entity. They don't own 50,000 units of housing. They own a single family residence that they rent out, or they own a duplex or fourplex. And so I agree that you need to make sure that you're addressing the entire equation.
Right.
But the first concern should be the most vulnerable people out there who are about to lose the place where they live. And I think you can also address the relationship between a landlord with a mortgage and their bank. And that has been done by the Federal Housing Finance Administration, by a number of other federal agencies. So there has been work on that part of the equation. Now it's time to make sure that people don't get kicked out and they're not on the street or in shelters in the next 30 or 60 days.
Yeah, when you really think about the practical side of this, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to kickstart evictions right away, because it's not like there are a line of people waiting to get into housing all of a sudden when you've had, as you said, 36 million job losses and counting, by the way. We probably haven't seen the height of that just yet. Well, housing will continue to be an important subject, and I want to move on to another important subject that we've seen a lot of recently, and that is the policing around America. Here in Austin and around the country, we've seen police violence and shootings continue to happen during this pandemic. As a country, how can we make sure that we're holding law enforcement accountable?
It's a great question, and it's one that I devoted a lot of attention to in my campaign. And we put forth a plan on policing reform. Unfortunately, Ed, as you know, you've observed politics for a long time. This is not a subject matter that even most Democratic politicians are willing to touch, but it's one that we should address. And I have a lot of respect for people who are in law enforcement. I worked with a lot of them, a lot of good police officers when I was mayor of San Antonio and a councilman. Saw it at the local level where you deal with those issues the closest. At the same time, we see so many instances of police overreach, of excessive force, of disparate treatment according to the color of your skin. We saw what are perhaps the newest cases of that just over the last few weeks in Indianapolis, in a number of other communities. So my plan dealt with several things: demilitarizing our police, getting rid of these weapons of war that the federal government has been delivering to local police departments, and often overdoing it and creating a uniformly SWAT mentality.
Mm-hmm.
It dealt with qualified immunity, because that too often lets police officers who engage in excessive force and cause injury or death to somebody off the hook for personal civil liability. It called for also creating a national use of force standard, because why should a police officer treat you differently if you're doing the same thing if you live in Austin versus if you live in a small town in Mississippi or you live in Honolulu, Hawaii? It doesn't make sense for there to be 2,000 different use of force standards.
Right.
And then finally, I want to invest in those groups that are those nonprofits that are doing great work, that want to mend the rift that too often exists between law enforcement and some communities, whether they're communities of color in different parts of the country, different neighborhoods. There's some good work to try and mend that rift, and we should invest in that.
Yeah, I do remember hearing when Chief David Brown up in Dallas was overseeing the force up there, that he had set up a good model for community collaboration. I don't know a whole lot more other than that. I'd heard good things about it, but it certainly would be good to see more initiatives like that. We have a few more minutes here, and before we wrap up, I want to ask, do you want to offer your Twitter handle and your email address, or anything where people can find you and keep up with what you're doing? And are there any passion projects that you're taking on right now? I think your family is what you mentioned is like your biggest passion project at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else can you tell us about how people follow you?
Before I ran for president, we had set up an effort called Opportunity First to support progressive candidates across Texas and across the country. And so we're going to be revamping that effort soon, and we'll have an announcement about that. But basically, to go out and endorse and support great progressive candidates that are running across the state and also across the country. I'm really excited about what we have here in Texas in terms of the quality of candidates, whether it's folks like Gina Ortiz-Jones or both of the folks who are running, MJ Hagar and also Royce West, who are running for Senate, endorsed folks like Candace Valenzuela. So we have a number of great progressive people that are running, and I'm sure that I'm doing what I can to support them. On top of that, I'll find a way to continue to use my voice to move progress on issues and on candidates that are making a difference out there, not only in 2020, but beyond that.
Well, I'll tell you, someone who served as mayor and housing secretary and ran for president, we sure could use someone with that kind of experience here in Texas. I don't know if you have any ideas of anybody who fits that bill and what they might run for, but if you do, I sure hope you'll let us know.
I will. Yeah. No, for the first time in a long time, because I got into politics at 26, and I don't have a particular office that I'm aiming for right now, but I've always had a heart to try and do something for other people through public service. And so it may well be that at some point in the future, I'll run again. In what context or for what, I'm not sure right now. But in the meantime, I will do everything that I can to make sure that we defeat Donald Trump in November, and that progressive folks get elected in the state of Texas and beyond.
Well, Julián, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate the conversation. And of course, it's good to see you. It looks like you're healthy and like you're doing well.
Yeah.
Great to see that you're still in the fight and standing up for people.
Thank you.
There's a lot of people that could really use some help right now. And I think you're someone who's able to do that. So thanks so much for doing it, folks. I think it's at Julián Castro on Twitter. Is that right?
That's right. At Julián Castro. And then Instagram is just Julián Castro TX.
Looks like the other Julián got it first, huh? That's the other.
That's right. Yeah, I think so. Unfortunately, got to buy it back.
Right.
So.
Well, listen, great talking to you. And I know that we'll see more of you again real soon, and we're looking forward to it. Thanks a lot.
Good to see you, Ed. Thanks for your leadership. Take care.
Thank you. All right. Take it easy.
All right.